to end the show today with some NFL free agency grades. We're going to finally finish. Yeah, round of applause. Yeah, we're going to finish, everybody. Finally, it's been so long. Going to finish the NFL free agency grades, and we're ending today with the NFC North. And we are going to, as we always do, we're going to give out the grade first, and we're going to go mostly alphabetical. So maybe if you're a fan of the Minnesota Vikings, you can skip to the end of the video. Maybe I'll give some timestamps. Actually, that might be a good idea. But starting with the Chicago Bears, who get a D+ for this NFL free agency. We're going to have a lot of low grades today, ladies and gentlemen. The Bears were a big disappointment this offseason in free agency. They didn't have the cap space to really make any moves, but what they did with the limited amount of cap space that they had was really horrendously confusing. To put things into perspective here, they tried to trade for Russell Wilson this offseason. They were offering an obscene amount of draft capital and players. And since, that was never going to happen despite the media hype, Russell Wilson, I think, was never really ever going to be traded. Since that didn't happen, and since it was never going to happen, they had to release one of the best cornerbacks in the league in Kyle Fuller to create some cap space to sign, drum roll please, try not to shake the camera too much, Andy Dalton. They released Kyle Fuller to sign Andy Dalton, and I understand that the Bears needed a quarterback, but especially after we saw what Carolina did with Sam Darnold, Ryan Pace, you couldn't pull off the Sam Darnold trade. You ended up releasing Kyle Fuller to sign Andy Dalton, who they could have signed last year for cheaper when he was released by the Bengals, but instead opted to trade for Nick Foles. When you lay it all out like that, it's a little bit of a cringe-worthy offseason there for the Chicago Bears. The Bears were able to tag Allen Robinson, but unless they pull some money out of somewhere where the sun don't shine, they might not have the money to they might not have the money to sign him next season. The Bears, one really good signing, apart from tagging Allen Robinson, was re-signing Mario Edwards, who had a really good season last year, and got him some additional help with Khalil Mack, some more help around the defensive line. But they didn't really get better in free agency this offseason otherwise. In fact, I would make the argument that they got worse. If anything, you can argue that they got much, much worse. They'll probably end last in the division. Well, actually, no, the Lions are in the division. They probably are not going to have that great of a season next season. I would argue the Bears get a D+ for this year's free agency. Moving on to the Lions, who get a C for this free agency period. The main thing with the Lions this free agency is that they lost so much, especially on offense. Not only did they lose Matthew Stafford, who, granted, it was probably his time to go. He wasted so many years of his career in Detroit. It was probably time to move on anyways, but they also lost their two top wideouts in Marvin Jones Jr., and Kenny Golladay, and they also lost a reliable third man in Mohamed Sanu. So it's pretty clear to me that the Lions go wide receiver with their number 7 overall pick in the draft. I would be surprised if they didn't. They need to get back a potential star wide receiver. The Lions also let go of Danny Shelton on the line and Desmond Trufant, quarterback, two capable starters on defense, albeit a little expensive. The Lions did re-sign Romeo Okwara, which was big. That was probably their best signing, and they got him at a decent price. They also traded for Michael Brockers with the Rams, so they did get some additional help on the defensive line, and they got some additional depth pieces at running back and wideout as well. They also got a late signing from Quentin Dunbar, which will help replace Trufant, but it's very clear that this is the beginning of the rebuild for the Lions, and the Lions lost a lot of star caliber players, or at least starter caliber players, this offseason. Their only really good signing was Okwara, so you can only give the Lions about a C. The draft is where the Lions are going to make strides, if they do make strides in the upcoming seasons. The Green Bay Packers get a D+. The Packers have had another frustrating offseason filled with cap space issues and a lack of signings. I've made a video specifically on the Packers' lack of signings, and it extremely frustrated me then. It extremely frustrates me now. When your three biggest signings are Aaron Jones, Kevin King, and Mercedes Lewis, that's kind of an issue for a team that is very apparently in need of some extra help at wide receiver, and is just a couple of pieces away from being able to jump over the hump of not making it to the Super Bowl as the NFC participant. So with the knowledge that the Packers need a little bit more help to get over the hump, and with Rodgers working more or less to get out the door sooner rather than later, the fact that the Packers are making no moves in free agency really frustrates me. Instead, a lot of the talk about the the Packers in this free agency has been about Rodgers' contract and why not they are not restructuring it. I'm just really frustrated with Green Bay because Rodgers only has a few more chances to get another ring, and the Packers ideally have been on the precipice of a title for nearly every single year for an entire decade now, and the fact that they only have one ring with Rodgers is embarrassing. You need to crack open a few eggs at some point, Green Bay. The Packers get a D+. And last but not least, to tie the entire bow on the knot, the entire knot on the bow for these NFL free agency grades, we have the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings were one of those teams coming into the offseason that I was very curious to see what they would do. They didn't necessarily have the best cap space situation in the world, and I asked the question often, especially during the front office frenzy segment that we did for Minnesota. Are the Vikings a good team that had a bad season or a bad team that needs some serious overhaul? And I ventured more towards the side of a good team that had a bad season, and their answers in free agency kind of proved to me that they also agree. I think that as a start to answering that question, the Vikings had mostly a pretty good free agency. They signed Dalvin Tomlinson from the New York Giants to plug up the middle of the line, which was a huge issue for the Vikings last season. They signed Patrick Peterson as well, who I think is going to be a really good mentor for Cameron Dantzler, who was their third-round pick last year that came on strong towards the end of the season. So you get some experience at cornerback. Patrick Peterson may be on the backside of his career, but he is still a valuable asset in my opinion. They also signed Xavier Woods to help with the secondary. So the Vikings have done well to address the holes in their defense that held them back, or held the team back overall. And the team had a really good offense last year, so it was really the defense that was holding them back. If the Vikings can just find some offensive line help in the draft, they will be in a good position to get some success. But if they don't, then it's not going to be a really valuable free agency for the Vikings because they didn't go after an offensive lineman. So if they don't get an offensive lineman in the draft, it's going to be a huge oversight that they didn't get one in free agency. In fact, they let go of one actually with Riley Reif. So they're, I almost said a completely different name. If you know, you know. The Vikings get a solid B, and that is the end of the free agency grades for the 2021 NFL offseason, and that is likely the end of the show, ladies and gentlemen. Another shorter show today, but we will be back with more content later in the week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. This will be up on YouTube as soon as I can get it up. You are listening to the Hard-Headed Sports Podcast, episode number 36, hosted by me, Nick Ryan, and with that being said, stay hard-headed, everybody, but have a nice day. Hey folks, thank you so much for listening to this segment from the Hard-Headed Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed this segment, make sure that you drop a like on the video and a comment. It helps me out a bunch. And if you're interested in watching more segments like this from the show after the show has been completed, you should definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you're interested in listening to the entire show in its full-length entirety, you should listen to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Once again, thank you so much for watching the video. My name is Nick Ryan, and I will see you all again very soon.